So the last regional identity that we're going to focus on is the Midlands Friends uh, culture, which is going to be the culture that's going to emerge in the Delaware Valley and in Pennsylvania, broadly speaking, particularly in the eastern part of Pennsylvania. And what's fascinating about this is if you look at that area, which kind of extends down from New York down towards Pennsylvania into New Jersey, this area is going to be defined by quite a lot of urbanization early on, but also by a culture that is going to be defined by a belief in human equality and gender equality, a lot of progressive ideals that we're going to associate more with modern America. You could say, okay, that's great. We've been looking at all these old colonial settlement patterns that might have some reflection on modern culture, but not much. Whereas when you think about the Midland culture, it's much more modern in the sense that it's progressive and multicultural. So this group of people, which was associated with the Quaker religion, and if you know anything about Quakerism, a much more liberal and tolerant form of Christianity, very, very different from Puritanism and very, very different from evangelical Christianity, which is going to define the Appalachian culture. And so the North Midlands Friends are going to basically bring this culture of the Midlands of England. Now, the Midlands of England is slightly to the south of the area we're talking about with the Appalachians, is going to be this area over here, over towards Wales. It's going to include a number of areas that even in terms of Britain were very un-British, meaning quite pluralistic and diverse. And that pluralism and diversity is going to be the thing that's going to define this culture from the very, very beginning, along with the fact that many of them were skilled artisans and farmers, but particularly people from a little bit higher social class. So unlike the Appalachians, who were poor, the people of the Midlands had a little bit more social clout. And this goes all the way back to William Penn, who, when he founds Pennsylvania, the colony of Pennsylvania, he talks about envisioning a colony where people of different creeds and ethnic backgrounds could live together. And obviously, if you're an immigrant, you're going to want to go to a place like this because it's going to be accepting, unlike New England, which into the 1850s was extremely anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant, and the South, which was, just viewed immigrants as another servant class. And so, if you look at this for a second, this area of the Midlands and the Midland settlement between Pennsylvania and New York is going to attract an awful lot of immigrants because it is tolerant, because it allows for all of these other cultures to basically define it. And it's interesting that William Penn basically said, I don't want this culture to be one that's going to enforce its beliefs on other people. So the accepting and tolerant nature of the Quaker culture essentially meant that it got overwhelmed by the immigrant cultures very quickly. But at the same time, this kind of politically progressive and accepting quality of this culture is going to be kind of the culture of the cities later on in America, but also it's going to be the culture of very, very key aspects of, in particular elections. So if we look at this a little bit more carefully, we start to get into detail about, again, go back to the election of 2008, which is the election of Obama against McCain. We can see that the Appalachian area in the Deep South is going to be predominantly Republican, conservative. But if you look in that area in through Pennsylvania, in through even into the western parts of Pennsylvania, and some of that has to do with the urban areas, but also if you notice in through Indiana, there's going to be smatterings of blue into Illinois as well. That is the legacy of the Midland culture in American voting patterns. What that means is there's going to be a little bit more acceptance of diversity. They're going to be mixed in with the Appalachians. So those areas are going to be very, very important politically. If you think about Western Pennsylvania, Southern Ohio, and even parts of Southern Michigan, These areas are extremely important for both parties to win. So winning over that sort of Midland demographic becomes important. And again, these cultures aren't still there the way they used to be, but they're there in kind of a muted form. And I think it's interesting that the more these cultures rejected outsiders, like the Appalachian culture did and like New England culture did, the more these cultures were able to remain intact for much longer periods of time. Whereas the Midland culture, because of its accepting and multicultural qualities, ended up getting redefined by those immigrant groups. So hopefully that gives you some idea of those original four settlement groups and how they defined the colonies and then the United States. I think it's important to think about the fact that, going back to these four groups, to what extent do these things still exist? To a certain extent, they all still exist. The question that I have for you, leaving this off, is, okay, which one is still the most distinctive culture? Maybe it's still that has still the most significant presence in modern America. Which one has the least? I guess I'm suggesting that the North Midlands has the least, but in being the least distinctive, perhaps is the thing that ultimately defines us in a larger sense overall in the modern period. And the ways in which modern politics is still defined by some of these broad cultural divisions and regional divisions. So there's a lot of disagreement about this. Obviously, if you're interested in this, the book American Nations by Colin Woodward is a great way to extend your understanding of this if you want to look at it in more detail, which you'll be able to do for the independent project a little later in the course. So give this some thought. Be interested to hear your thoughts when we get to class.